What I love most about events like these, it's not just the spreading of ideas, but it's that people come together. And I think we often forget that humanity is made up of humans. It's made up of individuals. And one of the things that made the human race so successful is not that we're the strongest or that we're the smartest, it's that we're social animals. We have the ability to form communities, cultures. What's a community? What's a culture? It's a group of people with a common set of values and beliefs. What's a company? It's a group of people with a common set of values and beliefs. What's a nation? It's a group of people with a common set of values and beliefs. When we're surrounded by people who believe what we believe, something remarkable happens. Trust emerges. Make no mistake of it, trust is a feeling. Trust is a distinctly human experience. It's not a checklist. Simply doing everything that's expected of you doesn't mean people will trust you, it just means that you're responsible. Trust is a feeling, and it is a very powerful feeling, and it only comes from being surrounded by people who believe what you believe. I'll share with you an example that freaks me out every time I talk about it. What's our most valued possession on the planet? It's our children, right? Our children are our most valuable possession on the planet. So let's game out a scenario. Let's say you want to go on a date, so you need a babysitter. You have two choices. Option number one, there's a 16-year-old from just down the street with barely, if any, babysitting experience. Option number two, there's a 32-year-old who just moved into the neighborhood. You don't know from where, but she's got 10 years of babysitting experience. Who do you choose? You choose the 16-year-old. Think about that. You would rather trust your most valued possession on the planet with somebody with no experience, but they're from within your community, over somebody with vast amounts of experience, and yet you don't know where they come from, or where they belong, or if you can trust them, or why should they trust you? Then why do we do it differently at work? Why are we more obsessed with someone's resume and what they've done and how much money they've earned for our competition and can they help us, and yet we never think to ask or understand, do you belong here? How can we trust you? How can you trust us? One of the greatest challenges any organization has, believe it or not, is its own success. All organizations start out the same way. There's some sort of metric, usually money in this case, and time. And when an organization is founded, what they do and why they do it are inextricably linked. And that's because there's usually a founder or some small group of founders with some vision of the world that doesn't exist yet. And they're filled with passion, and they attract people who believe what they believe. And those people join up, and they want to work with them. But then they get more successful, and they're no longer relying on their gut decision and each other. Now they have to start hiring people who hire someone who hires somebody who hires somebody who has to make a decision. Based on what? And that original cause gets forgotten. Although they do really, really well here, the original reason why they started the company gets forgotten. And all of a sudden, weird things start to happen. I call this the split. And when an organization goes through the split, there are a few symptoms. The old-timers will say, it's not like it used to be. It's not like it used to be. And yet they can't put it into words. What do you mean it's not like it used to be? It just doesn't feel the same, they say. Other symptoms of the split are when stress goes up and passion goes down. You worked really hard at the beginning. How come it didn't feel stressful then? And very often, you become more obsessed with what your competition is doing over what you are doing. In organizations, as they become really successful, this starts to go away. And what you start to see is that even though they're making more money, and even though they're selling more, fulfillment does not go up. In fact, what does go up is distrust. We stop trusting management. We stop trusting each other even. Now, my fear, my thought, is that maybe America has gone through a split. If you go back to the greatest generation, our grandparents, we call them the greatest generation. Think about that for a second. Why did they get the label the greatest generation? I'm Gen X. That's unfair. I got a variable, the unknown variable at that. They get the greatest generation. I get X. Okay, why were they the greatest generation? Because they were a part of something. They were all united in pursuit of something bigger than themselves. There are stories of young men who shot themselves when they didn't get called to action. The population bought war bonds. We were all together. We trusted each other. We trusted our leaders. And off we went to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. But then the war ended. And then they came back, and they felt like they'd missed out on life being at war, and they grew up in the Depression. And so they set all of that intense loyalty and that intense trust, and they went to work. And we know what defined the 1950s. This is when you gave your life to your company. You worked for years until you gave up and got your gold watch, right? Absolute loyalty. And what we started to see was a growth in wealth in the country, growth in GDP, and an increase in affluence. But that same sense of fulfillment wasn't there, because now they were working hard, but they weren't feeling a part of something anymore. And the distrust started to show up. And in response was the hippie movement. And the hippie movement could happen because there was more social welfare. The country could afford it for people to fall off the grid. And a lot of those kids who were joining the hippie movement, they had rich parents, and so they could afford to go away and run off and pretend to do something. But that sense of fulfillment, that seeking to rebellion against their parents' affluence, didn't have that same sense of fulfillment. They weren't getting it in the hippie community. And then you had the 1970s, the me generation. And everybody thought that you had to find some spiritual guru before you could find some sense of fulfillment. And cults all of a sudden were on the rise. And that evolved into the 1980s, still very, very me-focused. Gordon Gekko, greed is good, except this time it went from spirituality into business. All of a sudden, business was good. It wasn't dirty to be a part of a business anymore. And for the first time in history, in the 1980s, theories were proposed to use people to balance the books. This was the first time we started to see massive layoffs of human beings in order to make the numbers work. Then you had the 1990s, a period still self-involved, dot-com boom, and that didn't work so well. And now we're in the latest period, in this new decade of uncertainty and searching. We know that this hippie movement thing didn't work, and the obsession with that money thing didn't work. But as our country continued to, the GDP started to go up and affluence started to go up, this started to go away. And that sense of purpose and that sense of cause went away. Now technology hasn't helped. Even Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, said the only thing the microprocessor really ever does is make things go faster. And that's exactly what technology has done. It's made that go faster. Right? Technology is wonderful for making connections. Technology is wonderful for the exchange of information. Technology is amazing for driving transactions. You can perform transactions faster and faster than we've ever performed them, but technology is terrible for creating human relationships. There was a time when a desktop meant something horizontal. Today it means something vertical. And there was a folder is a picture of a thing we used to use. Now, that's a fun example. But technology has co-opted some very human things as well. A friend is not somebody you check their status. Your network doesn't happen on LinkedIn. A dialogue doesn't happen on Twitter, and a conversation doesn't happen on a blog. These are human experiences, and they require human beings to be in the room. Even bloggers. I love how bloggers talk about the internet as the end-all, be-all of the world, and that every year they come together, 20,000 of them descend on Las Vegas to have a conference. Why couldn't they do it online? It's because you've got to have the human union. In the 1960s, a man by the name of Stanley Milgram did an experiment. He wanted to understand how the Holocaust could happen. And so he wanted to understand how an entire population could stand by and watch genocide happen, or some could even contribute. And the excuse they gave was, I'm just following orders. And so he did this, what we know now is a terribly unethical experiment, but amazing results. He had a volunteer come in, and that volunteer was told that they would play the role of the teacher. And there was another volunteer, who was really a scientist pretending to be a volunteer, who would play the role of the student. That teacher was sat at a table that had a button and a dial. And the teacher was told that the student would be asked a series of questions. And if the question was wrong, or if they refused to answer, they would have pushed the button and administer an electric shock. Now, in reality, there was only one electric shock given in the whole experiment, and it was a very small one given to the teacher so they could know what it felt like. And the dial, they were told, after each question, they were to turn the dial up one notch, and it said sort of mild, medium, somewhat painful, extremely painful, very painful, and it went red, and then it said XXX. And as they would start the experiment and they would start giving the electric shock, the other scientists would pretend that they were in pain. They would pretend that they were getting an electric shock. And the person would feel bad, and they would look to the scientist and say, I'm hurting the guy. And the authority figure would look down and say, I'm afraid the experiment must go on. The experiment really must go on. And some of them would mutter to themselves, the experiment must go on, the experiment must go on, as they continued to press the button. What the results revealed is that when the teacher could see and hear the student, they couldn't go very far before they completely quit the experiment. when they could hear them but not see them. They could go further, but still not very far before they quit. When they could see them but not hear them, they could go further, but still not very far. But when they could neither see nor hear the impact of their decisions, 65% of those teachers were able to go all the way and kill the guy. And you know what they were concerned with? I'm not going to be responsible, am I? The reason it's an unethical experiment is because 65% of people who thought they were good people when they walked in the door went home with the knowledge that they could kill another human being. Now think about how we do business today. There was a time that if you wanted to know what your employees thought about you, you walked on the factory floor and you asked them. There was a time when customer service meant you talked to a human being. Now customer service is you'll get a reply to your email in 24 hours. I saw a bank advertising that you get to talk to a human being. I earned miles up the wazoo on one of the airlines. You know one of the things they gave me for my status? A phone number to talk to a person. Since when is a person a luxury? Our survival depends on it. Now think about how we do business. We do business on screens. Companies manage their businesses on screens. And the more they make, the more disconnected they come from the founding of the company, the less they talk to their own people, the less they see and hear the impact of their own decisions. It's not a surprise that we're putting poison in foods, chemicals in foods. And now scientists are saying that if we continue down this path, this generation will have a shorter lifespan than the previous generation. That's not surprising to me. When you cannot see nor hear the impact of the decisions you make, 65% of us have the ability to kill someone. What we need is more human interaction. What we need is to shake hands. We need a handshake leadership. We need handshake conversations. We need handshake friends. We need handshake dialogues. We need handshake meetings. Imagine if you were to meet somebody and you do a deal with them. You get along great. They say, I agree to all the terms and I'm totally going to do business with you. And you go, great, shake on it. And they go, I don't need to shake your hand. You go, come on, we agree, let's shake on it. I don't need to shake your hand. I agree to all your terms. You won't do business with them because they won't shake your hand. That's how powerful human interaction is. What we need to do is set out and shake hands more often, put ourselves in situations where we can create real human connections and where trust becomes the standard and not the exception. Thank you very much. Thank you.